All right, so Paul joins us now, fresh off retirement from playing. We should make sure we note about that. Of course, it's from playing. He's still very involved in his life in the lacrosse world. Paul, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So if you just let yourself go, I mean, just hanging out watching Ted Lasso every day, how's it going?
I haven't started that yet. I think the finale is tonight or tomorrow, and then I'm going to binge it. But season 2, I'm looking forward to. I did start Squid Game. That's pretty good. And played a round of golf, played a little bit of hoops, and got back in the gym recently. So yeah, I mean, I've never played this out in my head. I never thought about what it would be like retiring. I also didn't really think much about retiring either. I think that's part of being an athlete over a long period of time is you're hyper focused on the present moment. But here we are.
You're in it, right? Now that you know that you're in it. What, I guess, you mentioned you worked out. What do you think, for so long, you're probably your whole life, you've had a physical goal to work out towards. I was curious, what is the motivation now to go out there? Is it just to be healthy and in shape? Because at some point you sort of have to say, well, I'm working towards the next season, or I'm working toward one thing. When you go out and play basketball or whatever, what is the motivation for you as an athlete? At your caliber, over the years, you've had to deal with motivation in different ways.
That's where I felt a little bit of regret on retirement, is getting back out there and feeling the explosiveness that I still have. And you're like, the compete level. But to answer your question, I mean, working out is so much about headspace and energy, and it like gives you back what you put into it. Contrary to when you grow up, you think that working out will deplete you, but as I've got older, I learned that it actually re-energizes you, and that's my goal now, is headspace mentally, continuing to stay in good shape physically. I can dial my workouts back from 2.5 hours to an hour, and I'm still doing events with the league, still going out and shooting, and want to be in good enough shape in the event that things were ever to turn back in the other direction.
Really? Is that door open? Are you like the 99%? Where is that door, Paul?
Well, the thing that I tell friends and others about this process is making a decision like this is incredibly hard. I've had other moments in my life where I've had to make hard decisions, starting the league. With hard decisions, you're never going to get to 100%. And that actually helps people make a decision. I was having a conversation with one of the nation's top recruits that's in high school right now, who's a friend of mine through his father, and was giving him the same advice. Like, you reach this stalemate in the process. And I remember being a 16-year-old trying to commit to a school, and they're all great. So you basically weigh your decision. If you can get to 80%, that's pretty powerful in the hard decisions in life. And I was above 80%. I was like 95%. But at the same time, I'm nuts enough to build a lacrosse league. So I'd be nuts enough to come back at some point.
And I think you mentioned that it's important to know, I think, giving you confidence on the other end to live with that, and knowing that you have to live with the consequences of that decision no matter what. And I feel like a lot of people go and they're so scared to make the decision because they don't know what's going to happen after. But if you're like, okay, I did this, now I'm in it. You know what I mean? I feel like people have to realize that they have to make that connection to what's going to happen on the other side of it too.
And there's no such thing as a wrong decision.
Right.
Because just theoretically, you don't know what the other path would have given. I could have played next year and torn my ACL in training camp, and like, you just don't know. And so for those of us that make a decision and then feel regret, you gotta curb that with the unknown of, had you gone the other way. Life is so complicated. But I think for me, in this decision specifically, having played some of my best ball in this last season, which was really, to be honest, like really unexpected. I trained my ass off, but I'm trying to build more logic into my life, and I hadn't played to my standards the past several years. I actually felt a sense of empowerment of still walking and not temptation to continue playing. And that was, even more part of the decision that it was time to go.
Do you think you proved something last year, considering what you did the year before? And I know that there were circumstances. You probably trained, I'd imagine, with motivation as hard as you did for 2020 that you did for 2021, maybe different motivations and self-talk in there, but you played so much better in 2021. You know what I mean? Do you feel like you went out there and said, well, look, I could still do this if I wanted to at any time?
Yeah. No, there was a different degree of motivation for me, no doubt, because I just about laid an egg in 2020. And yeah, it was different. It was an 18-day tournament. And the benefit of sports is actually getting those weeks in between poor performances. I tell you, I always have poor performances. I had poor performances this year. I have them every single season. And then you address it the next week and you come back on fire. And that's part of the ebb and flow and resilience in sports. And you don't get that at the tournament. And you see that in World Cups, right? Lionel Messi has a bad World Cup. And the thing about COVID is that was our season. That was every league season. So I could have sat back and made excuses, but there were them. I wasn't going to have it. And I was pissed, man. I was pissed about the way that I played. I wouldn't make any excuses around the stress of building the bubble or the inability to get the same type of workouts because we were all in lockdown, because all the guys had the inability to get the same workouts in. And I hold myself to the standard of the best players in the league. So that was a lot of motivation. And then I came out and was able to get some vengeance.
Why? Why did it translate differently this past season for you?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, I had that fire internally that I've had in my career before when I was traded first time from Boston to New York, coming off the 2014 World Championship loss all the way through to 2018, injuries and surgeries that have ended seasons. There are those moments, right? Losing the national championship my senior year to Syracuse, and then responding my first 2 seasons in MLL. There's always those moments. You can't make them every year. Greg Popovich will famously, and Coach K, say that if you're trying to repeat as champion under the same mentality that you had when you never won, it's bullshit. Good luck. You're just trying to trick yourself. So you have to find new motivation. But when you do get those moments of really back against the wall, who am I and what do I have to prove? Then that's real fire. I had that, and then I had a fresh start. I had coaches who, I thought at one point, I've told Coach Quirk this, I thought he was nuts. He would treat me from our first call like I was 27. And I was like, this guy watched the championship series. And even Sean Kerwin was the same way. But that helps. I mean, every athlete needs the support of coaches and teammates. And then the other thing is I had Brodie and Lyle as my co-captains. And, Lyle's the greatest player in the world right now, and a close friend of mine. And Brodie is, one of the greatest players ever, the greatest ever at his position, and the savvy, mature veteran. They both had my back, and then that trickled down, and I was able to feel like I was a player again and not this conflicting player owner.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that with you in the locker room, and some of the personalities around you compared from the Atlas over to Cannons. And, you think about guys like Lyle and Brodie, who are, not to say anything badly about the guys on Atlas, of course, but Lyle and Brodie, such their personality sort of lends itself to making you one of the guys. You know what I mean? And I feel like that probably helped quite a bit too.
It helped for sure, but I actually think it was more on me in relocating myself in the Cannons locker room versus Atlas, because half the guys on Atlas, they're guys that I've won championships with, from Trevor to RP3 to Tucker to Hartzell. These are guys that I go in any foxhole with. And so it was actually me in the first 2 years at Atlas taking a back seat because of my own, call it sensitivity or insecurity around being a co-founder in the league and then being a captain of the team. And what I found this year, because Brodie, I remember our first call with the Cannons, it was virtual, sitting in the middle of COVID, and we had 24 guys on, and everyone was on mute. And Coach Quirk was doing his damnedest to get people to step up. And I was texting Brodie, I was like, I think you're the right person to step in here and start the conversation. And he refused to. And he just like, it's yours. And it was quiet for like 30 seconds. And I was like, all right, I went off mute. And that was the push that I needed. And I felt myself, like I've always been at my best when everything's on the line. I've always sucked at Lake Placid, Vail, and Ocean City. Worst numbers, because there's just not as much at stake. It's an incredible tournament and fun to play in, but if you're gonna have everything at stake and then be a captain of the team and be like, if I'm not showing out, then what am I doing here telling all of you to show out? That's when the most pressure's on.
Yeah, and I think
I moved myself from that at Atlas.
I think the role of a captain is different than I think a lot of people think. You know, the perception of who a captain is or what they should do. I think a lot of people say, oh, he's the best player, he's the captain. But like you said, it's like you're like looked around, you're like, well, somebody has to do this. You know what I mean? And just because you are Paul Rabil didn't necessarily mean that certainly made you the captain automatically. It's sort of, you could be the gym bag carrier. You could be the 10th guy in the depth chart and still lead the team. And a lot of the most successful captains in history have been those guys on the most successful teams. And I think that from leadership standpoint, I think it can be done in a lot of different ways. And like you said, from Atlas to Cannons, you saw that firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly intuitive. We call it like Western exceptionalism in pro sports. It's really like North America, where we're programmed to name the best player on the team captain.
Right.
But if you look in the East, the captains are like the true heartbeat leaders of the team. And in fact, the best players on the team oftentimes aren't best suited to be a captain because they have the most pressure to perform. And frankly, and the example that Sam Walker, who's one of my favorite authors who writes in the captain's class, is Pele. Pele was never captain of Brazil.
Right.
Because they always had the theory, like, why put that pressure on him? We need him focusing on him. He's going to score 3 goals for us. And it's not a selfish thing. It's just a lot. And if you look overseas, and we talked about Ted Lasso, the center backs are usually the captains. That's the mentality that you want. It's like Brodie's the best captain I've ever played with and for. And they're, to use Sam Walker's quote, they're water bottle carriers.
Yeah.
So I've always felt imposter syndrome around being a captain because I don't view myself as that good of a leader as some of the captains that I've played with. It's more aspirational. But we all take on different shapes and sizes of leadership within our teams. And I think I proudly take on leadership roles.
It's funny. I think everyone should probably go read. That's exactly what I was referencing, Paul, that book, which I've read as well. So people just go read the book. That's why Paul and I are in the same wavelength with that.
Yeah. There you go, man. Yeah.
So you look at on a greater scale. So you finish up with really good numbers in your final season, and you move on. Of course, we know the role in the PLL. We'll get to that in a little bit here. But I want to ask, outside of PLL playing, what does retirement do for life outside of that? You sort of referenced that a bit already. I'm just curious in terms of how that maybe opens things up for you, if maybe still it is all PLL like that. You have made lacrosse your life. I'm wondering, what does that mean for the rest of your life, maybe outside of all of that?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it depressurizes my nervous system in a pretty dramatic way. I've been traveling a ton. Like we call right now, we just got back from a week break we gave the company after the end of the season. We call right now our on season. It's what's difficult about our business model, where it makes all the sense in the world to be single entity and operate and distribute. It's also different from trade association leagues, where if you're the front office, in the players off season is when you run hard, you build next year's business. And so you're selling, you're working on new structures of partnerships, you're traveling the country, in some cases traveling internationally to build out international markets and strategy there. And then when the season hits, the teams take over and they operate the games on a home and away model. And so the front office mainly manages and governs from there. So we're running the games, and the season's very taxing on the company. And then right now we're in our on season. So it's really 365. So what Mike and I are doing are continuing to resource the business and our business unit leaders with great leadership and you know, improved and new colleagues into the organization that can help everyone who's been really working hard the last 3 years to get to where we are. And then, you know, for me, I'm getting some of that time back to not have to find an immediate gym in between business meetings in New York or LA or Chicago. You know, I can shave maybe an hour or two off my sleep and maybe be a little bit less healthy. Because this is a slog, man. Like building a sports league, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, and something else that you've talked about a bit, you did it at the retirement as well, the press conference. I think I saw it on YouTube, the Goals for Greatness, an initiative for you, you know, to put goals in different places around the country or everywhere in the country. And the thing, Paul, that I, you know, people can learn more about that, of course, they go to your social media or whatever, the press release, is I really think access one thing, but also perception really stuck out to me. That the perception of seeing goals, that aspect of it, I think, why was that so important to you is what I wanted to ask.
Because it dictated what I did when I was younger. So a lot of what I do in my career is about researching and then analyzing my experiences in my life and those of my peer group. And then thus other athletes who are my age when I was younger, you pick a sport that you're good at and there's a large element of aspiration. So you're not seeing, in our case, professional lacrosse on TV or all over the place. There's not going to be that same drive that some of the top athletes in the world get around wanting to make the NBA or the NFL. And so, you know, I did a vision board probably 5 years ago, and one of the kind of genie in the bottle questions was, if you could do one thing that would change the sport, what would it be? And I found that there were a lot of things that were interesting to help the sport. But I really tried to like zone in on that one thing. What would that be? And the idea was, well, I would love to have goals on every field in the country. Like, what would that do to lacrosse? Man, it would change it. And I started like writing about it. And that was a problem that hasn't been solved, or a challenge, I should say, not a problem. And it's something that I want to do. I think we missed the window as a sport when it came to, you know, government and municipality funding that sports like football got, and even the build out of basketball courts and tennis courts, which were, you know, approved through local government, park and rec at some point in our American history. And so it's really difficult to go back and reopen those budgets from what we talk about, like public funding. So I think the path for us is private funding, and that's the goal for Goals for Greatness.
Yeah, and it felt like, because you talk about sort of developing and growing that organically, and the TV deal, of course, the PLL is such a huge proponent of sort of your coming on the scene, the PLL, and launching the league and getting that exposure. So you get that from the top in terms of that way, and you do it organically as well. And you think about the last sort of decade or so, and I guess it's a little more than that. 2008 felt like the tipping point for a lot of people in terms of, oh, look at the attendance at the Final Four and everything like that. And then it's sort of like, well, what happened? And it feels like that more is what's needed in terms of, you need the exposure, but you also need these other, you need to be touching a lot of different facets of society to grow a sport without just trying to do it like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there has been in all sports this idea at different moments in time that organic growth is the path to commercial viability, or the NFL, called path to the NFL. And it's just not true. And there's never a case study where that's happened. So most sports, if not all sports, start, the way I explain it, is bottom up. So they have youth participation, it grows into high school, nationwide interest, sanctioning to college. And then if you have a pro entity at the top, it can benefit, but what actually has to happen, if you look at that pyramid, is it has to flip at some point. And then what happens is it turns into this robust vertical cylinder, but it doesn't flip to where there's no youth participation anymore. Although you could argue the NFL and the UFC have sustained and continue to grow with a decrease in participation and practically no participation at the UFC youth level. But this idea that more participation in the sport will grow the top, which is the pro game, is inherently untrue. The reality is lacrosse had this huge bottom-up moment that kind of capped, to your point, in 2008. And what a sport needs to do, if it's gonna do, at some point flip it. So then you have momentum from the youth level up to college. Take that, build a pro league, create commercial interest and demand, and then what that does, it trickles down and it adds this like wildfire growth to the youth level and even college level. And that's what we're trying to do. And then everything widens and verticalizes.
Yeah. How do you shape, this is the next stage for you and your full-time PLL. How does that shape what you want to do for your league and the sport moving forward here now, looking into year 4?
Well, it starts with our next media deal. We had a 3-year deal with NBC, and part of why I'm in New York right now is continuing to meet with them. And I think, you know, if we look at what was especially eye-popping for those that were watching the PLL in year 1, was like, wow, this broadcast, this production is fantastic. And we had a really strong, creative, and nuanced deal with them that allowed us to do what we do across social. A lot of networks will black out the league's social accounts when games are live. Yeah. But we knew that we were at a stage where we needed to feed each other. So there's nuance to these deals as well. It'll start with our media deal. We're going to onboard and introduce more partners. We're looking at our season length. We're looking at expansion down the road. We're looking at like a city-based model. We've always analyzed that from the beginning. I've been forthcoming with it. But there's a lot of momentum. It starts with our media rights deal this offseason. Yeah.
Where are you on that? Is that something that's worked on now? What's the process like in that timeline?
Well, it's basically an 18-month process that we're going to do in 4 months. And, you know, we're not shy about it or not used to doing things that quickly from our league to COVID. So we're in a good place and excited about, you know, detailing more of the progress in the coming months.
And, you know, as you continue to work on that, like you mentioned the social media, and you think of the perception of the sport. And, of course, you know, you go to Twitter, and lacrosse Twitter is an animal on its own. How would you describe, as someone who is very involved in social media and a league that's has embraced social media more than maybe any other league I've seen? I mean, you had the Bitmojis with the players. I mean, I remember that from the first few weeks and having all that. I mean, how would you describe lacrosse Twitter and their perception of the PL? I think you've probably seen both sides over the course of the few years here.
Well, I think it's great. And in any business, especially entertainment, if you don't have both sides, then no one cares. I think about it with building the next stars of the league. If you don't have people who are dissenting, then there's not enough interest. And that's in the movie business, it's in the sports business. So I love it. If we didn't have that, then we have a business that people don't really care about. So you have people that love it. We have big advocates. We have mavens of the PLL. We have people that don't like it and are going to try to tear it down. And that's entertainment.
Do you react to that at all internally? Like some of the naysayers? Is that something that you guys talk about? Or is it something you sort of say, okay, well, that's what's being said, but we're going to continue to go and do what we do?
No, I think it's really important to listen and have a pulse on what people are saying. And you can do a couple of things. You can address it directly if there are problems, if there are holes. And then you can also like use it to shape future conversation. Like I'll give you an example. I think a lot of the source of call it negative lax Twitter is transparency from the league. But there are things that we do at the league that we have to maintain integrity around. For example, and this is with all leagues, confidentiality and HIPAA law. Like during COVID, if someone runs into a contraction of the virus, you're not able to disclose unless they give you approval to disclose. So it's also not our responsibility to share that level of detail. So there are things that like you're just gonna have to either, if you frame it as falling on your sword over, or just remain quiet, calm, and confident over. That's okay, and the chatter is part of the process. And then there are other things that we've learned from, right? We move so fast. A lot of times, the things that we're addressing within the company is giving our product managers and our graphic designers more lead time around a concept we have for next year's All-Star game, because things happen so quickly. We try to be transparent with press releases and interviews, but we leave stuff off the table, and then we get the feedback and go, next time we'll share that as well. Example of that would be the way these rosters unfolded this year from last year, and we weren't disclosing the reserve players through the weekly rosters, and that was a pain point for some analysts. We saw that and addressed it. So you always kind of have to be listening. I think that's important.
Yeah, and probably you're trying to always explain that maybe as time goes, and maybe sometimes there are blind spots there, I'd imagine, at the same time. You can't think of everything.
There's blind spots probably in everything that we do.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of the process. I think if we're out there doing this regularly, this is long form, and you're obviously a great analyst, and this is endemic, where you and I can talk about it, but to be able to cover it in 280 characters is impossible and probably desperate.
And you think about conversation about the sport, and we've experienced this at LSN at some times, and we'd have a debate out here in the past, and some people wouldn't like that, and we'd hear from people. And I feel like in any sport, I mean, you look at NFL, and people debating that one day, January 1st through December 31st every single year. To me, as someone who consumes sports, it feels like if someone's talking about your sport, that is a good thing, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, unless there's like a flagrant foul, and it's happening with a league right now, and it's happening with a media company right now, then there's like real damage done, and reconciliation needs to be had. But related to like rosters and player controversy and league all-star game criteria and stuff like that lives in every sport. It's the business we're in. If we don't have skin thick enough to handle that, then we're not in the right business.
And Paul, we just saw Tom Brady go back to New England. For you, I feel like you're in a similar spot here. Coach Petramala on the sidelines of Syracuse. Your perception on seeing Coach Petro in the orange and blue alongside Gary Gait?
I thought you were going to first ask me who I was cheering for, because I was conflicted there.
I could not do. I wasn't going to do that to you. Good, I'm not going to ask you that.
Thank you. Okay. No, I'm excited to see how the Orange play this year. I owe a lot of debt and gratitude to Johns Hopkins for investing in me as a player and building community that I have luckily access to. But at the same time, Dave Petramala recruited me, and his staff recruited me, and what you learn in business and in sports, it's about the people. So I'm going to be on the sidelines cheering for Syracuse, going to be on the sidelines cheering for Hopkins when the two play against each other. It'll probably feel, a little bit like that Tom Brady, Belichick, Patriots, Bucks game last night.
Yeah.
So maybe got a little bit of a rep there, but Coach Petro is a dear friend. He came to my retirement announcement, and he's been a mentor of mine for decades.
Yeah, and I know you've been close to him, and I talked to him a few times after he stepped away from Johns Hopkins. He was chomping at the bit to get back out there. I know you know that too. He wanted to coach badly, right?
I mean, I could feel it in my first catch up with him. We talked for like 45 minutes the first week back for the students at Syracuse, and he felt his old self.
Yeah.
You almost hear him breathing normally again, because that guy's got a ridiculous engine.
Yeah.
He's the biggest engine in lacrosse, and he puts it to good use. Puts it to good use for the players that he coaches, for guys that he coached, for upcoming recruits, and he knows the game so well.
Yeah, he did it as a player, doing it as a coach, continues to do so today. Paul, we appreciate your time. Thank you, and congratulations on retirement. I know you're not really going anywhere, but it's great to catch up with you and hear your perception on a lot of things going on in the world of lacrosse and beyond. So we appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, likewise. This was like more of a state of the union. So thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no
it.
problem. Thanks, Paul.